Arbitrary limits on child marriage interferes with parental rights and religious liberty. We have to put the line somewhere in order to protect children. So I want to talk about children's issues to start today's shows off. I want to talk about a law in Wyoming which has been proposed, which would ban child marriage. Well, not entirely. It wouldn't really ban child marriage, but it would ban marriage of children the age of under the age of 16. So if you're under the age of 16, you can no longer get married in Wyoming. Now, it's not restrictive enough in my opinion, because it actually allows wiggle room for 16 and 17-year-olds to marry as long as they got parental consent. So currently it's even younger. You can get married as a child younger than 16 currently in Wyoming law. But this law is simply restricting it to make it so that if you're under the age of 16, you cannot get married. Still allows it for 16 and 17-year-olds with parental consent. That still makes me uncomfortable. I don't necessarily think that should be allowed, but this is a step in the right direction. Now, this has caused Republican outrage in the state of Wyoming. Now, when I first read this headline, it said Wyoming limiting child marriage sparks Republican outrage. I was like, oh, okay, so they're along with me, they're with me, and they think it needs to be more intense. They think it should be raised up all the way to 18, that you cannot get married as a minor. Oh man, okay, I can understand that. But no, I was completely off. I was completely off base. It is not the fact that they're angry that the marriage age is actually too young, and that 16 and 17-year-olds can still get married without parental consent, which is my big issue. The reason they're angry is because they're making it so people under the age of 16 can't get married. They think they're making the anti-child marriage laws too restrictive in the state of Wyoming, and Republicans are actively blocking this legislation, which was proposed by a Republican, by the way, from advancing. This is absolutely insane. I can't believe we're still having this discussion. I know a lot of people just think it's a matter of just, you know, writing a few documents here and there to ban child marriage in a lot of states, but it isn't. There are lobbies actively in these states, and there's 8 states in the country where child marriage is still legal, Wyoming being one of them. There is a lobby in each of these states actively trying to stop child marriage from being banned because people want to marry children. It's absolutely obscene. Let's read the article, and we'll watch a video about it. And then I want to bring up just a level of hypocrisy, which should be kind of obvious to anyone paying attention. The Wyoming Republican Party is seeking to kill a bill working its way through the state legislature, proposing to raise the state's legal marriage limit to 16. Could you... I'm sorry, it's not even like, hey, we're banning child marriage outright. We're banning minors from getting married outright. It's, you know what? At least wait till they're 16 and get parental consent. Already, that's too little for me. But for them, that's too much. I can't believe... This is insane. Arguing that putting arbitrary limits on child marriage interferes with parental rights and religious liberty. Arbitrary. Arbitrary limits on child marriage interferes with parental rights and religious liberty. We have to put the line somewhere in order to protect children. I can't believe, after hearing so much about, hey, you know, if you have a gay person in a child's cartoon, that's grooming, that's bad, that's so evil. If a child even knows that gay people exist, that's grooming, and we can't allow that. If you allowed a rainbow flag in school, oh my God, that's indoctrination. But 12-year-olds marrying grown men? No, that's different. That's religious liberty. That is parental rights. If a parent wants to decide to marry off their child, which they can't consent to because, again, they're a child, in the same way a child cannot consent to sex with an adult because they don't have the ability to consent, they don't have the mental fortitude to, the same thing applies equally to marriage. This isn't an arbitrary restriction. Where we put the line is somewhat arbitrary. It's just going to have to be when you put a limit somewhere. But as a society, we've drawn the line at 18. Now, when we're talking about under the age of 16, already that's not restrictive enough for me. But they're saying no, 14, 13, 12, 15. This is marrying age. There's a reason why we don't allow these children to have sex with grown men, because we know about the type of mental and psychological harm that can do to a child, grown men or women. We don't want them to get married off because they're not old enough to make an informed decision about whether or not they should be marrying a grown man at the age of 12. At the age of 12, you do not have the mental fortitude or the comprehensive skills to decode if this person is right for you for the rest of your life. You have not been able to explore the world. You have not been able to properly explore yourself. There's a decent chance you don't even know how to, like, I don't know, write in cursive or do long division. Like, there's a million things that you haven't wrapped your head around, but you can at that age wrap your head around a lifelong commitment to another person. This is actual grooming. This is, I mean, let me just be blunt with you guys. If an adult has sex with a 12-year-old, that is rape. That is rape because a child cannot consent. And if you put a child in a marriage with an adult, if you do that, then you're dooming that child to be raped more than once, but time and time and time and time again. Because they do not have the ability to consent to these types of activities. This is not appropriate for children. And I'm hearing it from the same crowd
Burns is
who would do everything in the state of Wyoming to stop rainbow flags in schools, to stop any LGBTQ plus characters in children's cartoon, to stop inclusive sex education, to do all these things which they call grooming, but then will go out of their way to try to block bills like this. And let me just be clear. This isn't, oh, 1 or 2 or 3 Republicans holding it up. The Wyoming Republican Party sent out emails to try to stop this. So I'm not even saying like, oh, these are like a few really radical Republicans in the state of Wyoming. This is the Wyoming Republican Party. Let's read a little bit more of it. I'm sorry, this is honestly disgusting. The bill, which already passed the Republican-controlled Wyoming House of Representatives on a 36-25 vote, it's absolutely bizarre it was that close, proposes banning state residents from marrying anyone under the age of 16 while requiring anyone under the age of 18 seeking to get married to receive written consent from their parents under the eyes of a competent witness. The debate has been a long-standing one in Wyoming. You want to know what's wild about this? Considering how moderate, I can't believe we're calling this moderate, how much they're allowing wiggle room here by still allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to get married with parental consent, that indicates to me, and how close this vote was, just like a 10-vote difference, right? 10-vote difference. This leads me to believe that if they were to design the anti-child marriage law that I would want, which is you turn 18, then you can get married because you're an adult, that there's a decent chance it wouldn't have actually passed. And that is bizarre to me. Currently, Wyoming is just one of 8 states in the country, including California, Michigan, Mississippi, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Washington, West Virginia, without a minimum age requirement for marriage, and is currently ranked among the top 10 states in the country for child marriages. What a depressing statistic, according to a 2021 study by the advocacy group Unchained at Last. Efforts to raise the age of marriage in the state have constantly stalled. For years now, retired Lamary Democratic Representative Charles Pelkley sponsored legislation to raise the age of marriage to 18, only to fail with every effort. They had to reel this legislation in order to get it passed. If it wasn't for them reeling it in, it would have failed again. It's also a common practice across the country even now. While the number of child marriages nationally has been in steady freefall over the last few decades, just 7 states to date have voted to ban it entirely, even as countries like the Philippines passed national laws banning the practice. Other states like Tennessee have actually sought to go in the opposite direction, with Republicans there seeking last year to eliminate any limits on marriage entirely until public outrage forced them to reverse course. So, we're covering a pretty bad case here in Wyoming, but there are other states where the situation is worse, and they're actively trying to make it easier for people to marry children. Again, giving children medical care around being trans as a young person, as a minor, that's grooming. Telling kids about homosexuality or LGBTQ plus issues while they're under the age of 18, that's grooming. Rainbow flag in school, that's grooming. Comprehensive and inclusive sex education, that's grooming. Marrying a 12-year-old, totally fine, not grooming. That's Christian. This year, however, a proposal in Wyoming to impose a floor age of 16 has found favor with some Republicans in the state, leading to the first real momentum the bill has seen in some time. Earlier this week, the Wyoming Senate voted up the bill on the first reading, leaving it just 2 more votes before it ultimately heads to the governor's desk. It's essentially a do-nothing bill, according to Unchained at Last, an anti-child marriage advocacy group, approximating that 97% of child marriages in Wyoming are girls aged 16 to 17, meaning it would likely impact only a small number of children. And so this is one of the big reasons why, to me, this isn't enough. I mean, it's a step in the right direction, but they barely were able to make the step in the right direction. And every single time they've tried to actually deal with this problem comprehensively, it gets shot down. This is only going to stop 3% of child marriages in the state of Wyoming, because 97% of them are at the ages of 16 and 17. This is, as they put it, a do-nothing bill, and even though it was a do-nothing bill, there was still enough Republicans who were willing to stand in line here and try to stop this bill from passing to virtue signal on protecting child marriage. It's really great that the legislatures want to protect 3% of those who are impacted by child marriage. But to us, if you're failing to protect 97% of the people you're claiming to protect, you don't really have the right to brag about that. To me, it's just a bill. It's not even worth the paper it's printed on at that point. The Wyoming Republican Party, however, is urging its constituents to oppose it not because the bill is too weak, but because it believes the bill stood to rob their constituents of their constitutional rights in the ways the seemingly harmless bill did not immediately make clear. To make the point, the party shared this is wild. So again, this isn't like a few radicals in the Wyoming Republican Party. This is the majority of the Wyoming Republican Party trying to stop this bill, and these are Republican politicians who will most likely move on to become national congressman, national senator, governor, and all these different things, all these higher level politicians that are going to take this ideology and bring it to the national stage as they try to crusade for marrying 12-year-olds on a federal level. To make the point, the party shared materials in a Thursday evening email to constituents containing talking points from the Wyoming Family Watch, a religious lobbying group organized by a conservative pastor in the state. Among other points, the letter argued that preventing children under the age of 16 years old from marrying denies the fundamental purpose of marriage, robbing teen parents from their ability to remain together under one roof for any children they might bear together, even though nothing in the state law would prevent those children from co-parenting. Since young men and women may be physically capable of begetting and bearing children prior to the age of 16, marriage must remain open to them for the sake of those children, the post read. The sad fact that physical maturity often does not match emotional and intellectual maturity is an indictment of our modern educational system. That is a problem that should be addressed, but we should not use it as an excuse to institute bad law. So, the main problem I have with this is that you can still raise a child and not be married. They're already not of age to be making the decision on whether they should be having a child or not. Period. When you're under the age of 18, you're not of the age on whether you should be making those decisions, okay? We all understand that people under the age of 18 still, engage in sexual relations, because that's just how the world works, and we need to do our best to encourage comprehensive sex education, which is proven time and time and time again to help lower the rate of teen pregnancies, as does making things like condoms and contraceptives available to young people. But if they're already in a position where they have where they have conceived a child, which is the decision they shouldn't have been making in the first place, putting on them another decision they shouldn't be making in the first place when it comes to getting married at the age of 12 and 11. Because what they're saying here is that if you can conceive a child, you should be able to get married. We're talking about 11-year-olds now and 12-year-olds. We're not just talking like, oh, well, 15, 14. We're now talking about children as young as 11 and 12 getting married and conceiving. They are not of an age and when they could be making a decision whether they should be marrying somebody else. How are they supposed to know if that person is abusive, whether that person loves them, whether they will continue to love them, whether any of the decisions they could make to make a comprehensive decision that this person is going to be right for me for the rest of my life? When I think about how I was when I was 16, when I was 15, when I was 14, 11, and 12, when I was these ages, hell, even 17, I was not of a state of mind to be making decisions about living with somebody for the rest of my life, marrying somebody, and making a permanent commitment to them. They are not of that mental fortitude. And parents shouldn't be making those decisions for them either, because that's not their life. They're not going to be married to this person, so they shouldn't be making the decision about whether you should be getting married or not. And we know when they're 11 and 12, there's a very, 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 very good chance that the person making them get married isn't that the child's like, Mama, I want to marry Billy. I want to marry Billy after he's done playing with his Matchbox cars. It's their parents trying to pressure them into getting married after they found out that they were pregnant, or it was some other kind of weird religious cult in the middle of Wyoming, and they are trying to make that child get married. And parents should not be making those types of decisions for young children. If they're 18, 19, 20, and they want to be part of some arranged marriage, I mean, I would never be a part of that, but if they want to do that, ultimately that's their decision. But that is not a decision for an 11-year-old, that is not a decision for a 12-year-old, and that is not a decision for a 13-year-old. If they can't do long division, then they should not be getting married. According to Unchained at Last, in the U.S., approximately 60,000 marriages since 2000 have occurred at spousal age differences that could have been considered a sex crime, allowing a marriage license to become a sort of get-out-of-jail-free card for a would-be rapist, particularly if they impregnate the victim. And so again, let me be clear, in my scenario, I said it was Billy, somebody playing with the Matchbox cars. But in a lot of these scenarios, we're talking about grown-ass men having sex with 12-year-olds and then having them protected under the law by getting them married. And there's Republican politicians in Wyoming taking up the sword. The majority of elected Republican politicians in the state of Wyoming are perfectly willing to pick up a sword and defend these people and defend these rapists as they talk about how much they care about the grooming of children. In the case of a girl who gets raped and gets pregnant, the answer for them is, instead of putting the rapist in a position prosecuting him, we're going to marry him off to the girl he raped, said Reese. I mean, it's unspeakable. It's unfathomable. It's absolutely horrific. So the potential is there. In Wyoming, approximately 20 child marriages take place in the state each year, state records show, with occasionally disparate age differences. During a hearing on the bill earlier this year, the deputy state registrar of vital statistics told lawmakers that they had seen one case in which a 32-year-old man married a 16-year-old girl in Wyoming. The Casper Star Tribune reported, while there have reportedly been several instances of 14-year-olds being married in the state. Meanwhile, other research groups from groups like UNICEF have argued against any loopholes. Any loopholes are largely insufficient to address coerced marriage, depriving the child of any agency in the decision. Parental approval can often be synonymous with parental coercion. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Do you guys honestly think that there's a lot of 14-year-olds out there who are giddy to get married to a 32-year-old? Who are like, oh my gosh, when I think of my forever person, I think of a 32-year-old man at the age of 14. No, these are parents telling them that, hey, this person raped you under the law. That's just what it is when a 32-year-old has sex with a 14-year-old and has gotten you pregnant. And instead of us, say, going out to get an abortion, or you conceiving the child and maybe and us keeping this rapist away from you, because again, they're a rapist, they're a child molester, which we want to keep those types of people away from this 14-year-old and away from the child that will be born here. Instead, they're like, let's put these two people together, get them married, and basically push the child to marry an adult. Because that's how these scenarios go. There's not a lot of 14-year-olds who are giddy to get married to somebody in their 30s. Parental approval can often be synonymous with parental coercion, especially in the case of unexpected pregnancy, financial instability, or other situations that might influence a parent's decision, a 2021 UNICEF policy brief reads. In all scenarios, child marriage limits the rights of children and deprives them of an opportunity to control their future. That still was not enough to convince some critics, however. Despite state testimony, critics argued there was no evidence presented to demonstrate Wyoming was facing any statistical uptick of coerced marriages, making the passage of any bill a moot point with no clear rationale to support it. This is the thing. Does it have to be an uptake? Any amount of child marriage is too much. If there's one instance of child marriage in that state, the person who married the child should go to prison, and that child should be removed from their parents. Period. Period. In the House committee, there was no testimony weighing the trade-offs of parental rights over against any significant issue with child marriage in Wyoming, the Wyoming Family Watch argued in its letter. To the contrary, the sponsors of the bill openly admitted that it is not what we would call a problem in the state. On average, 20 marriages per year under 18 in Wyoming. There was no testimony about the factual number under 16, nor was there any testimony about why 16-year-olds there should be judicial exceptions. It shouldn't be judicial exceptions, but Wyoming is so fucking crazy that they can't even accept the idea that a 16-year-old should not be marrying a 30-year-old. Oh my God. They're like, well, if you really care about child marriage, why did you make an exception? Because if they didn't make an exception, it had no chance of passing whatsoever, just like the previous anti-child marriage laws, which when they tried to pass it, the Republican Party shot it down because they wanted children under the age of 18 to be able to marry adults. Newsweek has reached out to the Wyoming Republican Party for comment. However, Reese said anything short of an outright prohibition of child marriage does nothing more than give legal cover to potential rapists while trapping children, particularly young girls, in a legal quandary they cannot escape. What we're arguing about in most states is the idea of entering a minor into a marriage before they're old enough to bring legal action in their own name or get into a domestic violence shelter, said Reese. It's a horrific legal trap that we're creating for minors. That's usually what we're arguing. It's just really despicable that in Wyoming, that has become an argument of whether we want to continue marrying girls off to their rapists. My goodness, man. My goodness. Again, we see so much anger. And the thing is, there was a queer publication, LGBTQ+ Nation, which commented on this hypocrisy pretty openly. Wyoming GOP defends child marriage while claiming it's trans rights that harm children. Like, you can kind of understand how this article goes. You can go read it for yourself if you want. It's okay. Calling out this hypocrisy, which I've been hitting on for the entirety of this segment. And we'll wrap up with this segment from Chuds of TikTok, which plays some of the audio of Republicans who honestly seemed uncomfortable, like they were kind of befuddled themselves as they had to come up in front of their state legislature and defend child marriage. Let's play just play a little bit of audio of that before we end the segment.
So the first bill for our consideration is House Bill 7. The reading clerk will please read it in.
Okay, let's skip all the knowledge of it. We already know all the knowledge. I just want to see the testimony.
I'd ask the body to resist this change and vote no on the bill. There are communities such as our Amish, Hutterites, and Mennonites here in Wyoming that would be in violation of this law if it was to pass.
Is that not a problem? I don't care if they're Amish, okay? If the Amish want to go drive around in their little buggies and stuff and like sell like wheels of cheese and go hoity hoity doy and make the big like barns and stuff, that's their business, okay? But there is never an excuse for rape of a child. There is never an excuse for marrying off a child. I don't care what community you're in, you cannot just say, oh, it's my religion, and just do whatever the hell you want. Could you imagine if I was just beating the crap out of my child, right? Just like giving them black eyes and busting up their lip, and there was like blood, and it was just so horrific. And I send them to school, and then of course CPS come to my home and they're like, what are you doing? It's like, well, in my religion, that's how you discipline a child. You know, there's a lot of things they talk about in the Bible as well, about how to properly beat your slave. Just because you can make it make a religious excuse for something does not mean that it should be legal. There's a lot of wild things that you can make a religious excuse for that does not mean it should be legal. I don't care if they're Amish. I don't care if they're Mennonite. I don't care if they're Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't care if they're Mormons. I don't care if they believe aliens are going to come down and resurrect us and bring us to Z2, the magical planet a million miles away with cotton candy and bubblegum skies. An adult having sex with a child is rape. Under any and all circumstances, it should not be allowed. We're not talking about Romeo and Juliet laws like a 17-year-old with a 19-year-old here. That's not what we're talking about. Something where you're like, oh, well, that's understandable because they couldn't have been in the same class, and you know, they're like, there's only a 2-year age difference. We're talking about children marrying adults and trapping them with their rapist. And there should be no defense from this from the same party that is claiming to crusade against grooming, but then going around and defending groomers in the legal system. This is horrific. This is terrible.